I'm going to just simply introduce the folks here and lead off with a quick timeline. We've been working on CommonCore state standards for about 2 years. Many of your schools have begun looking at these and evaluating curriculum around those. You'll hear more information today about where the next 2 years take us, leading from CommonCore implementation to the new generation assessment system in the spring of 2015. And this is some information that we'll share with you that really changes the face of assessment as a high-quality instructional tool. So with us today, Michael Hawk is our State Assessment Director. Pat Fitzsimmons is our Coordinator of CommonCore Implementation. And Julie Conrad is our Math Coordinator for middle school, high school, and right now actually pre-K-12. So we will move quickly through some material and then leave some time for question and answer and comments.
So a little background about the CommonCore state standards and the development process. That the National Governors Association, as well as the Council of Chief State School Officers, coordinated the work. There were lots and lots of other people involved. Vermont, being the feisty little state we are, we gave lots of feedback and really, I think, had an impact on the final standards, that you could see changes over time. So that was kind of exciting. In the summer of 2010, we adopted the state standards. Some states, Kentucky being one, adopted the standards in 2010 and expected teachers to implement the standards in the same year. We went with a little more thoughtful process. But really the amazing thing about these standards is that they are common, and common across a lot of states. Up there, we should stripe Minnesota because they've adopted English language arts, and will be adopting the math standards in 2014. It has to do with their state adoption process. A couple of the other states have adopted standards that have not adopted CommonCore, have adopted CommonCore-like standards. Our goal as the Department of Education has been to reach every single educator in Vermont. We recognize that there aren't a lot of us, and there are a lot of teachers in Vermont. So we're doing that by working regionally and working with teams of educators who then we want to have them bring that work back to every classroom teacher in their system. And if you look at that yellow sheet, you will see some learning opportunities for those leadership teams that are happening this fall and in the winter too. So here's our timeline. Remember I said Kentucky adopted and did implementation in the same year. We realized that teachers really need time to take on these standards, which are significant shifts from what they've done before. So we started awareness in 2010. We dug deeper last year in mathematics. We had regional meetings that focused on argumentation based on evidence, as well as precision of language. In English language arts, our focus was how do we help kids access complex texts? What's an explicit plan to help them get there? So we're right around here at this point in time. So I mentioned significant shifts. In English language arts, this idea of building knowledge through content-rich nonfiction. That we've always had some nonfiction, but really there's a bigger emphasis now in CommonCore going to 70% nonfiction in high school and 30% literary text. Reading, writing, speaking, and listening grounded in evidence from the text, both literary and informational. So one of the things I've been talking to teachers about a lot is how do you ask text-dependent questions? How do you ask questions where the answer lies within the text? Not because of your experiences, but because there's something that you've read. The other piece here that I really, really like is the inclusion of speaking and listening standards. I think as teachers have felt more pressure to teach certain content, this part has been left out. But it's really essential for developing understanding of content. It's also a lifelong skill that students need to be successful in career in college. And finally, this regular practice with complex texts and it's academic language. I'll get to another slide which will clarify the complex text piece. But the academic language, we're talking about those words that might have a different definition in different content areas. So the word square, for instance, I might square a number, or a square is a shape, or I might say Julia's real square. So that it has, depending upon the context, it has a different meaning. Academic language is also those kinds of words that are more challenging ways of saying something. So rather than saying, oh, Pat walked slowly over to the coffee, she sauntered over to the coffee. So we're really trying to develop vocabulary, and we know that has huge implications for comprehension. The ELA standards are broken into strands of reading, writing, speaking, and listening that I really like, as well as language. And they also, in the standards, this is a really nice piece to look at. It's page 7 in the English Language Arts standards, and it describes what we expect students to look like when they graduate from high school. So the governor this morning talked about how do we get our students to be college and career ready. This is what we're working towards, that all of those descriptors are essential for people being, for our students becoming successful in the workplace. I'm going through this very quickly, I apologize. So here's the graph that I mentioned earlier about complex text. So in terms of what students need to read to be successful in college and career and to be a citizen that contributes to society, the demands have gone up a little bit. The difficulty of text that students need to read in college have gone up a little bit. And if you speak to a group of higher educators and say, are you finding that students are ready to read the kinds of texts you're asking them to? I see a head shaking. All the higher ed people have said the same thing. And part of the problem is, and I think it was really with good intentions, we wanted students to be successful, but the level of text complexity K-12 has dropped significantly. So we have this huge gap that we need to do something about. I mentioned this earlier too, the balance between literary and informational text. You can see how it changes from the elementary grades to the high school with more of an emphasis on informational text. And finally, in terms of writing, that when you're a third grader, really writing about what you've done is really important to you, and that's great. So there's more of an emphasis on experience in the earlier grades, but then leading to an emphasis on explaining and persuading, the kinds of writing that students need as they do enter the workforce. Here's a map that shows you how all the pieces fit together. In kindergarten, we're doing some of the same things we've always done. Students need to learn that you read from left to right, that D is a D, and that the spoken word can be written down. And you can see also all the other pieces that I talked about previously, how they fit together in a nice package, and how early learning provides the foundation for later learning. So now I'll turn it over to Julie.
When we look at the math standards really, similar to how the governor was speaking earlier, math education, it's not just in Vermont that we haven't made growth for math. It really has been a national problem. And we've kind of known the issues of some of those problems for a while, but we haven't had the same language around it. So when they created the standards, when they actually went to go write the standards, they framed it around these 3 words, which is focus, coherence, and rigor. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what that means. But one of the biggest ahas that came out of our TIM study and about when we started looking at how the U.S. is doing in comparison to our national peers was this idea of mile wide and inch deep. That we were teaching too many conceptual categories, too many topics for kids, and it really created a very shallow level of understanding of mathematics. And part of that was because we had so many different standards, and publishing companies wanted to sell their textbooks to every single state, so they put every single state's standards into every single book. And so the standards here actually changed that a lot. Our K-5 standards are a much more focused set of standards. There are fewer standards. There are some topics that kids traditionally right now, from our grade expectations, are being taught in elementary grades that won't actually be taught until they're in middle school now. So probability, is a subject area that has always been taught traditionally starting in 2nd grade. That's now not going to be starting until 7th grade. And there's some actual really good research around why we do that. It's because when you introduce probability, you're introducing proportional thinking, and you're having kids think about that. But that causes a conflict when you're trying to have students thinking about fraction as a number, being able to identify it on a number line. So they removed that, they moved it to a later grade, so that way students have that strong foundational element of it. So the K-5 standards have a lot fewer standards. There's a much larger emphasis on numbers, operations, and measurement. So students at earlier grade levels should be pulling out rulers, they should be measuring things. Students need to have foundational understandings of number and operations, because that really sets the base for then the rest of the mathematics that they're going to learn. So when we get to middle school, the standards are kind of, at this point, the pinnacle years of this, because there's a progression of learning that happens, and that's going to happen it ends around 5th grade, and then 6th grade starts a whole new series of those. So when we get to 6th grade, these are really transitional years. We're expecting students to have met the foundational knowledges of number, operation, and measurement, and now they're going to be able to start to apply them in different ways. The other thing that's different in this is that our standards, our Vermont standards, which are relatively good standards, had kind of a big jump from these ideas of arithmetic into the world of algebra. It always felt kind of like you were pushing kids over a cliff and hoping that they made the jump into algebra. This has a much more aggressive approach to algebra, and it's a lot more sense-making as far as how we transition kids from arithmetic thinking to algebraic thinking. And one of the big changes of this is that most of the 8th grade standards in the CommonCore State Standard are actually linear algebra standards. So students will be getting exposed to algebraic concepts much earlier than we currently are. High school's change is really looking at that idea of college and career ready. So Pat talked a little bit about the ELA standards. The first place where this started was with defining what we really needed students to know before they left high school, so that they could take on technical training and to go into their careers, so that they were going to be ready to go into colleges without taking remedial coursework and be ready for their workforce so they can graduate in 4 years, less debt, and better prepared students. So when we get to the high school standards, we're really looking at college and career ready, and that big piece right there is the application of mathematics. So it's a huge emphasis on this is on application and modeling. And so if we look at the next piece here, this is the map of what it looks like. And one of the big changes for our educators is in the past we always had these domains that spanned K-12. So we had data, statistics, and measurement that spanned K-12. And really that's not how people learn math. So there should be a beginning and there should be an end point. And so you see that here with this, that there are expectations of where we're going to meet certain standards at certain times. And so it really shows you, and then you can see how some of the different conceptual categories blend and branch into the next piece. And so the standards were developed with learning progressions. So they actually wrote the story of how do students learn number over time. And there's progressions that follow this, so that teachers actually have as a resource an opportunity to read the progression of what is the story of how students and how people learn number, how people learn geometry over time. And so that's really a huge step for us with our math standards. Our previous math standards, we had these domains, and then we tried to determine what was age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for kids. And we created some redundancies, which then made it difficult for teachers to understand what really mattered. So we have kids right now who are taking their VCAP test, and in 3rd grade are getting tested on mean, median, and mode. And we have 11th graders getting tested on mean, median, and mode as well, and everywhere in between. And so what we really need to do is, in these standards, is redefine this is when it needs to be taught, and this is when students need to have the knowledge of it. Not that they're not going to then use that to continue their learning, but there needs to be a defined point where it really becomes an emphasis. So the other piece to this that's new, as you can see on the top here, is this mathematical practices. And this is something that the math education community has known for a really long time. The National Council of Teachers Mathematics, when they first developed national standards for our organization, developed practice standards, but the problem was that they never went anywhere. And so the new standards for the Common Core have mathematical practice standards, and those standards matter because they're purposeful in making them part of the standards, because then we can't ignore them when it comes to assessing them. And the practice standards are listed here. There's 8 of them. They're the only set of standards that do span entirely through K-12. and there's standards around what it is, what are the ways in which students should be exhibiting and looking and doing when they're looking at mathematics. And some of these are really great ways in which they can cross over into other content areas. So we don't want just students to be able to create an argument and critique an ELA, but that's also a really essential skill as a mathematician, being able to critique the argument of others and being able to express your argument in a way. Looking to model mathematics, looking to use tools appropriately and strategically. You know, there's lots of these different pieces that really make a lot of sense for us and have huge implications for how our classrooms need to change and how our teachers need to think differently about how they're actually teaching. Because this isn't the teacher reasoning abstractly and quantitatively, it's the student. So it's going to, I think, drive a lot of our instruction to potentially change to where students are doing more and being more active within the classroom. So I wanted to give you an example of what these practices might look like for students. So I put a little video clip in here for argumentation of a third grade classroom. And what the class is a teacher had been working with what is even and what is odd as a lesson. And so there's a little boy, Sean, who claims that he thinks that 6 is special. Because the working definition that they were working on was that if you could divide something into 2s, it's an even number. And so he said, well, if I divide 6 into 2s, there's 3 groups. So there's 3 of something, and I know that 3 is odd. So 6 is even and odd. So this is this misconception that the student has. And so what we're going to do is we're going to see a little girl provide an argument to try and show Sean the flaw. Is there
escape? Okay.
Four, 5, 6. Okay. Does everybody understand what he's trying to argue? He's saying 6 could be even or it could be odd. Well, watch what he's going to prove in this.
You can see this. There's 2. Number 2 over here. Put that in there. Put this here. There's 2, 2, and 2. And then we make 6. I know. I think I know what he's saying. You see?
Can you see him? He'll have some questions for you.
I think what he is saying is that it's almost, I think what he's saying is that you have 3 groups of 2, and 3 is an odd number, so 6 can be an odd number and an even number.
Do other people agree with that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And do other people agree with him? Do you disagree with that?
Yeah, I disagree with that because it's not according to, like, here, can I show them? It's not according to how many groups it is. Let's say that I have, if you call 6 an odd number, why don't you, let's see, let's say 10. 1, 2.
So it's hard to see. She's drawing 10 circles.
And here are 10 circles.
This is an older baby.
And then you would split down, let's say, I wanted to split them by 2. 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then why do you not call 10 like an odd number and an even number? Or why don't you call other like numbers and odd numbers and an even number? I didn't do that. I think you can bring it up. So I say it's 5, 10 can be an odd and even. Yeah, but what about other numbers? Like if you keep on going on like that and say that other numbers are odd, maybe we'll end up with all numbers are odd and even. Then it wouldn't make sense that all numbers should be odd and even because if all numbers were odd and even, we wouldn't be even having.
Okay, so I'm going to stop it there. So you can see that when we look at this, I don't know about you, but that's not what my third grade classroom looked like. And obviously there's some changes that have to happen, you know, when we think about what our education classrooms are going to look like. That was student-centered, that was a student discussion. So when we talk about the critical need of our students to be able to communicate and our students to be able to critique and provide an argument, then we need to give them the opportunities and the space for that. So that's part of the reason, too, why it's so important that when we look at that idea of narrowing the number of subjects in those K-5 subject areas, it's really important because we need to have them, teachers need to give our students the time for them to get to this deeper level of understanding. Everyone in that classroom is going to walk away with a much stronger sense of what odd and even is from this discussion. And Sean, in this situation, is going to have an opportunity to learn that where his thinking went wrong. So there's some really, you know, there's lots of different ways in which we really are going to have to rethink how we're doing things.
So I'm here to talk to you about assessment, and I'm assuming, since this has been a key idea in education for a long time, that you know that one of the major reasons we have standards, the three reasons that we have standards are to guide the development or selection of curriculum, to guide teachers in instruction, but also to tell us what it is we should be assessing to determine if students are mastering the content that we want them to learn. And so I'm guessing you also know that as of next fall, we'll be retiring our current New England Common Assessment Program, or as it's fondly known, NECAP, and we'll be moving into a new assessment program that's called the Smarter, that comes from the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. And Smarter Balanced at the moment is a consortium of 29 states, and we've been funded with about $178 million from the federal government and given 5 years to develop what the federal government would like to see be the next generation of assessments. And the key thing I'll point out to you now is that the major difference between a NECAP and the Smarter Balanced assessments will be the use of computers to deliver the assessment to students. So there's so many things I could talk to you about with this, and I'm not going to describe the whole Smarter Balanced program because there's a really good quality website that you can look at, and that website is, the interesting to know there is on that sheet. So what I thought I'd do today quickly is talk to you about why Vermont decided to go with the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, because there's a second consortium that was funded by the federal government that's known as PARC, or the Partnership for the Assessment of Readiness for Career in College. And I think that in the end, both of these assessment consortium are going to create very high quality, state-of-the-art, next-generation assessments. But there were a few things about Smarter Balanced that seemed to fit Vermont's needs best. And one of those things is that, you know, obviously we're one of the smallest states in the country in terms of student population, and also in terms of rural versus urban landscapes. And there are things about Smarter Balanced that seems to fit the needs of our state, and also some of the goals that we have for transforming education in Vermont. So let me quickly walk through these, and then I'm excited to show you some samples of the kind of test items that will be on this new test, and that's where I'll end up today. So why Smarter Balanced rather than PARC? First of all is this notion of balance. This was probably the key thing that drew us to Smarter Balanced. Prior to the beginning of Smarter Balanced, there were 3 smaller consortia around the country that eventually came together to make Smarter Balanced, and the balanced part was the consortium that Vermont had joined, and it came together around a seminal paper that was written by a person named Linda Darling Hammond at Stanford University. And Linda's notion, and kind of in a nutshell, is that once we have standards, that we should use those standards as a thread that joins assessment from the classroom level, moment-to-moment interactions with students that help guide teachers' instruction, to what are known as interim assessments that are things that school districts use for measuring the success of their programs, to those summative assessments that the state uses annually in accountability programs. And This is something that's built into the smarter system. It's not just a statewide test like NECAP. There'll also be computer-based interim assessments that will be available for school districts and teachers to use on a voluntary level. And there'll also be modules and professional development available to help teachers learn to use something that's called formative assessment. That again is that kind of assessment that teachers do minute to minute with their students, the questioning strategies they use with kids to determine if they should change the pace of their instruction or if they're ready to move on to the next concept or whether they need to back up and review concepts that they taught. So balance seemed to fit where Vermont wants to go with having instruction not just be something that gets published in the newspaper once a year, but that our assessment is integrated into instruction and helps teachers teach better. We were also attracted to this new technology in assessment that's known as computer adaptive testing. And boy, I wish I had a lot of time to talk about this because this is actually pretty exciting stuff. But computer adaptive testing was actually originally developed to be used in medical licensure examinations. So like your x-ray technician or the people that analyze your blood samples, they got their certification by taking tests using this technology. It's also being used in the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, the Graduate Record Exam. Several states have been using them in their state accountability systems. And again, in a nutshell, the way this works is that built into the computer system are these algorithms that deliver students unique sets of test items based on how they perform on each successive item. So, if I take one test item and if I get it right, the computer will select something a little harder for me. If I get it wrong, it'll select something easier. And the computer keeps going back and forth until it hones in on the best estimate of that student's ability. And there are a number of advantages to this. It saves time. You can get to a student's skill level in a lot less items. It's also much friendlier to kids because some kids now, the tests they're taking, they can't get a single answer right. But with computer adaptive testing, basically half of the items they'll get will be things they can answer and half will be things they can't answer. There's a number of other things I could talk to you about, but it's a lot of great advantages, and it's something we can only do with computers. Capacity sensitive, I'm looking for a better way to describe this, but one of the reasons that we were attracted to smarter balanced rather than the mark assessment is that probably right now, given the infrastructure and the number of computer devices available across all our schools, we wouldn't be able to implement their assessment because it takes a lot more computers. But this computer adaptive testing, it kind of solves problems around test security and the possibilities of cheating so that we can give schools a much longer assessment window, and also they're not required to test all their students at one time. So, if you're a smaller school with fewer computers, then you can test 3 kids one day and 3 kids the next day and 3 kids the day after that. Whereas with the park assessment, you have to test everybody at one time. And I'm hoping in Vermont we don't have to use this, but actually for the first couple of years of Smarter Balanced, we're going to continue to have a pencil and paper test for those very few schools that don't have the capacity to do this test on computers. But again, we're hoping that by the time we hit 2014-15, when this test is first given, that all our schools will have the capacity to do this, given that 3-month testing window and the fact that you can test kids in small groups or even one at a time if that's what we have to do. Finally, I think this is one of the key items for us, that Smarter Balance is using some of the most advanced technology that's now available in assessment. We've been working on these assessments since the beginning of the No Child Left Behind Act, and for example, in our NECAP states, we've researched and perfected a variety of computer-based tools for students who have special needs, and they're embedded right in the computer, so you don't have to use school staff to read aloud the test. For example, the read alouds are built right in. Things like that. And, students can enlarge the text. They can mask text that they have to read, so they just are seeing one line at a time. There's even things like calming music for students who have attention deficit disorders, or reverse contrast for kids who have visual problems. Lots of those. Also, this may not be as useful in Vermont, but the test is going to be translated into to 5 languages, including American Sign Language. And if you need American Sign Language, there will be, you've probably seen this on TV from time to time, but there'll be on the bottom of the screen a little oval, and there'll be a person signing the test into American Sign Language for you if that's what you need. Because one difference that I didn't mention is that in addition to the things we're now testing in NECAP, we'll also be testing listening and speaking. And so for a person who doesn't have the ear power to listen, we'll want to be able to put that into sign language for kids. So really interesting technology. Also, and this is what I want to show you right now, that delivering computer-based tests allows us to use these new things that are called technology-enhanced test items. And the best way for me to describe this is that I heard a speaker one time say that the technology that is currently being used in testing isn't as good as the technology that's available on the internet when you go to order a new car and you can change the color of the car and the picture and stuff like that. So we're actually Angry Birds is an example used. I'm hoping that the technology in the Smarter Balance will be at least as good as playing a game of Angry Birds. But let me just call this up, and if you want to go play with these items, this is now available on the Smarter Balance website, and you can go play with these sample items that just came out last week. But I just want to give you a hint of what a technology-enhanced item looks like. So here's what the website looks like. And with any luck, this will fire up. Great. Just a couple quick points about this website. In addition to what's presented by it, it's actually I think another example of the technology that we're trying to use. That teachers will have tools like this once the test comes out, so that they can look at items and analyze it. But so first of all, we can look at English language arts. English language arts versus math items, and we go up here and it gives us all the choices of the items that are there. If I only want to look at grade items for grades 3 to 5, it'll just pick those out. If I want to sort the items by difficulty progression, if I want to see test items that measure the same thing but at increasingly higher levels of difficulty, it'll sort them that way for me. It also looks at what are called learning progressions. Pat and Julie both were talking about this, that like in reading text, for example, you can have text that, in terms of decoding skills, word attack skills, are all 4th grade level. But the comprehension skills required to read that stuff varies. And so this site will sort things so that you can look at that. But anyway, okay, so this is a 4th grade reading passage. And so the student reads the passage, and by the way, if they want to see it all at once, they can. It'll just open it up for them. So after they read the passage, it pulls out just a section of it. And what the student is supposed to do is it says, click on 2 phrases from the paragraph that help you understand the meaning of the word scarred. Now what I can do is come up here and it'll tell me if I'm right. Whoa, and I got both points. Great for me. Okay, so again, this isn't a draw on the bubble thing, that there's actually more than, I think there are 4 things, four phrases in the paragraph that match with scarred, and it gives kids choices. But anyway, from the teacher's perspective, and getting back to the CommonCore, another thing that's nice about this is we can go up here and we can look at this information about this item. And so it shows me what the student has to do. Actually, it tells me down here which CommonCore standard it measures. What do they have to do in that? Students can read closely and analytically to comprehend a range of increasingly complex literary and informational text. And it focuses on the ability to recognize the relationship between word meaning and the context. So somebody brought this up yesterday. They're probably, if I ask you what does the word scarred mean, you could give me definitions of that, but just being able to define a word doesn't mean you can comprehend it in context. So what this does is it challenges the student to find a definition for scarred that matches the context that's used there. I mean, I could say scarred means I cut myself and left a scar. That's not how scarred's being used in this passage.
Now, will the test be timed?
Pardon?
Will it be timed?
The test will not be timed. One other quick thing I want to show you here that these are nice tools for teachers. Let me make this a little bigger for you. So one thing that's going back in time, one of the things that's been a problem about reading comprehension is that we've tended to define grade level of text by the decoding challenges. But what we know is, like if you look at your income tax form, you can use rather simple syntax, vocabulary, but still can be very complex. So there's now a system that was developed by a bunch of teachers working with the Council of Chief State School Officers, where they could judge the complexity of text, since the CommonCore has this focus on varying text complexity. And so it analyzes that text not just in terms of a lexile count, which is, lexile is a way that we measure the decoding difficulty, but it also looks at meaning and purpose. And the analysis of this shows that this is moderately complex in terms of its meaning and purpose. Text structure, it's very complex, the way it's structured. Language use, very complex. It uses words like scarred. Knowledge demands, moderately complex. So every passage is analyzed in those terms to determine, where it gets placed in the testing, but also to give teachers information they can look at when they analyze these items for their students. And one other quickie, if I can back up here. I want to show you a math item that's at the other end of the scale. And Julie, you'll have to help me on this because I can't solve this. Oops.
We were in trouble yesterday when you weren't here.
Yeah, I got the item wrong. Okay, here's an item that's called water tank. And it's a high school item in mathematics. And again, if I go up there, I can find out all about it. It tells me, it measures problem solving. It tells me which grade level expectation it is, or which CommonCore expectation it is. And what we're looking at here is whether or not students can use their problem-solving skills and gather data. And this is an item where there's a variety of ways to get a correct answer. So what it says is 2 water tanks are shown. Tank A is a rectangular prism. Tank B is a cylinder. The tanks are not drawn to scale on purpose because kids have to use their math rather than just visualizing the difference. And basically what it says is that we're supposed to analyze this and drag one of these numbers up into this box. It tells us what the radius is of that cylinder. And so here's what's kind of fun about this, and this is why it's problem solving than just kind of straightforward math, that I can click on this tank at any level of meters, and it'll move that much water. And I can, with my scrap paper, I can write all these down, and it tells me if I go down 2 meters in the rectangular prism, I gain less than 2 meters in the cylinder. And so I can do these, I can analyze these, and then I can come up with it's 8. The radius is 8. So I go up and check. Dang, it's not. Okay, maybe it's 5. I like 5 because when I got down here and I took half of the stuff out, I was a little short on it. So, and you notice at the top, by the way, it's telling me what the height is each time, so I don't have to look at that. It was 4. Oh, it's almost 5. Okay, I'm going to say it's 5 instead of 8. And let's see if I got it right. Yes! I got it right. I only know that, by the way. I could never tell you why it is. I didn't know to do that. I tried all the combinations until I found the one that gave me the right answer. But, so again, there's a ton of these kind of items, and For example, a big challenge, actually this would be impossible in the kind of tests we do now, but the CommonCore requires us to measure listening and speaking skills. Speaking is still a bit of a challenge, and that'll be addressed through performance tasks that kids will do in classrooms. Listening, there'll actually be video clips in some of the items. Kids will listen to a video clip and then answer questions about it. So, very high tech, great new ways to engage kids, and I'm done.
Michael, could you confirm the test dates for 13 and 14? So the fall of 2013 will be the last kneecap?
That's correct.
And then the spring, which would be 15?
The spring of 15 will be the first administration of Smarter Balance.
So next year is the last year?
That's correct.
Next school year? And then I have two questions about security and bandwidth. So I know that the DOE is looking into or is assessing if every school in Vermont has the bandwidth for this test.
Yes.
And then the security in terms of like screenshots being sent and published. I mean, what is Smarter Balance or Vermont doing about this?
Well, okay. So yeah, two questions there and different answers for both of them. But in terms of bandwidth, let me give you what I think is an interesting answer to that question, Sean-Marie, that the bandwidth required to deliver this test, probably the most challenging will be the video clips. To run the kind of stuff I showed you here, it doesn't require much bandwidth. But what I heard somebody say when I was in Washington 2 weeks ago with the State Ed Tech Directors Association is that in terms of bandwidth, this test has minimal requirements, and if a school can't run this test, then they have bigger problems because they can't use any of the great new technologies that are coming out and available, like in digital textbooks and that sort of thing. But we still know, and I hope that the governor is able to follow through on some of the things he said he wants to accomplish. We're hoping that every part of the state has the bandwidth that, at a minimum, they would need to do this. But you pointed out that Smarter Balanced and Park are now running what they're called a readiness survey, where they're looking at schools all over the country to find out three things. Do they have the bandwidth to run the test? Do they have enough devices to run the test? And do they have the kind of technical support they need in their schools in case things don't work well? And I can't answer your question directly today because those results won't be out till next fall.
Well, I just wanted to add to that. Is that in terms of the bandwidth, I understand exactly what you said, but is there also a concern about the bandwidth because there are X number of students testing at the same time?
That's correct.
Okay.
In fact, the hope is during this readiness survey that we'll crash the system. Well, actually, let me back up. That we're going to do full-scale field testing and pilot testing, two different activities. During field testing, we'll be testing the whole system, and the hope is that we'll crash the system so we'll know what the limits are.
And then you'll answer the security question.
Yeah. The security question is that this test will be delivered on a secure server that basically locks up the computer while the testing is going on to only running the test. And so they will not, the key that would allow you to, like the snip tool, it won't work while the test is going on. So this is actually far more secure than the kind of test we have now.
Valerie and
Yeah, I have two questions. One is now that 46 states have adopted the CommonCore state standards, is there going to be any joint push by the states to try to get the federal government to help with subsidies, particularly for the cost-intensive, seemingly to me, aspects of this, like, states getting the new technology that makes it possible for, 7 of these little iPads to be in each classroom so that the 20 kids can take turns and use those 7 iPads for testing. That's question number one. Then question number two is, for economically disadvantaged kids who don't have iPhones, who don't have computers at home, who don't have, am I going to be at a disadvantage if I'm a poor kid who doesn't have any of these things that we're beginning to assume everybody has? And I don't have an iPhone, and I'm an upper middle class person. but are they going to be at a disadvantage when they're taking some of these, all of a sudden we're moving into this, computer world where they're being tested on? So how's that work?
Oh, okay.
I'll just
Do you want to talk
answer a
about
couple
one-on-one
quick
things,
things.
John, quickly, and then I'll answer the second
Well,
part.
one is that we're working in a multi-state purchasing process now to try and get the per device price down considerably.
Okay, good.
And we should have some information on that shortly here. The other thing addresses your whole digital literacy piece. That yes, we do need students who are digital natives now. They've never lived in a time when we didn't have the internet and computers. So we do need to. It's an equity issue, and it's as big as the gap for students in poverty. It's not just a math and literacy gap, it's a digital device gap. So there is more and more nationally being talked about, that digital gap in learning, and we'll need to address it. Hopefully the two go hand in hand, and we're able to, through a multi-state agreement, get the price per device down, and then, ultimately we still have to deal with the price. Even as low as it is, how do we buy more devices? Then behind that is, where's the tech support? So the national survey that we've participated in, as Michael mentioned, measures current bandwidth, current hardware availability, and current tech support. We'll have to then, once we see what that is, by 2015 address that as well as we can. I think luckily, being a small state, we're probably not as weak in most areas as some states will. You had something else.
Yeah, just two quick points. First of all, I mentioned very quickly at the beginning that this just isn't a testing program that happens at the end of the year for statewide accountability, but the state will also be providing these interim assessments that run on the same technology as the summative test. And so our hope is that the kind of kids you're talking about will have experience day-to-day in their classroom using something like this. But this is probably going to sound cruel, but I agree with you that there's an issue, and there's a lot of research that indicates that the issue you're bringing up is true. But my personal feeling of this is that's not a reason not to do it. In fact, this is a way to apply pressure. And I don't know whether it's board members here. I'm assuming we do, but this. We're talking about kids needing 21st century skills, and we may find out that kids who don't have computers in their home are disadvantaged, and that's a good reason to get computers in their hands in school. So that's the best answer I can give you.
Yeah, I had two questions. You're talking about assessing the bandwidth. A national group is doing this. That makes me nervous. Why don't we have a group in Vermont doing this? And do you understand? Do we have a number of how many do not have high-speed internet to begin with? And the question is the size of the server. Obviously, a lot of servers are used in this program already. That should not be. It's a problem, but it should be addressed from the beginning. The worst thing that can happen is this thing fail. And then the other question is there money in your department to maintain and do the work that's required to keep this system viable 24/7?
So, to the first part of your question, or your first question, this readiness survey that the assessment consortium are running is not the only thing that's being done. Vermont Department of Education has a terrific state ed tech coordinator, Peter Drescher, and that kind of work is what he does all the time. And he's interacting constantly outside of the department with people in the IT and communication business. So we have state data as well, and are continually collecting it. To the second part. One of the things that's great about this one-on-one initiative that John brought up is that tech support comes with it. But frankly, the State Department of Education would never have the capacity, at least in my way of thinking, to do all the tech support that's necessary. And school districts are going to need to provide some of that on their own. I know in smaller districts that's hard to do, but most of our larger districts now have people that do tech support, or they contract with someone who provides that.